and prejudices and so on and so forth, that it's real easy just to say, classify this kook somewhere else. But like I said, I think upon a closer examination of people will patiently, even if entertained by what they think of as a kook or nut and stuff, really examine the evidence thoroughly, they might see that I make a pretty valid argument for what I believe is a very reasonably worded complaint, and although inadequate due to my circumstances that I'm having to file it during the greatest illness of my existence, greatest weakness of my existence, and greatest challenge of my existence by far. And so it's definitely not, what I would be able to do if I was healthy. But nevertheless, I've filed, and for very good reasons, and it is all connected, and I intend to show it here with this evidence here. Let's begin with once again with the claim and the affidavit, and then I will start to introduce, the evidence of why I believe, and more than believe, I know that this is just a mass amount of corruption. And I'm not saying everybody's corrupt. I'm saying that so many people are corrupt. It's costing me dearly, and it shouldn't be costing me. And furthermore, it's given me the hardship that every day I know that no matter how bad I've suffered to try to, and no matter how much effort I've given to try to save people's lives due to the corruption, there are many innocent people still in danger, and I must somehow find a way to persuade you that, look, I'm not a nut. I'm telling you the truth, and you need to, get out of your comfort zone about your false, conceptions of reality, and start to take a good hard look at reality, or it's going to get really, really bad in this country and around the world. We've got to stop dwelling in fantasy land of how we want things to be in our own minds, and take a good look at what reality is, and then work to change it into what we want it to be, which is, I would think that everybody would want, life, and a good life, for everybody, instead of what it is at this day. So, but let's take a good look and stuff, and like I said, my affidavit, and then I'll present the evidence of why it is all tied in together, and why my complaint is legitimate and filed reasonably. Alright, let's take a good look here. Get a good close-up of the screen as much as possible. And let's take a good look at, once again, let me make sure I'm getting a good angle on that. There we go, that's a pretty good angle of the screen right there. Okay, so this is a complaint, only it's the FVS, F as in Frank, V as in Van Sickle, or Van Sickle, or something like that. Van Sam. And then, again, that's the initial opening. It was notarized, motion for change of venue from Washington to Idaho, because the crimes crossed over here in Idaho. There's the Idaho number filed in the United States District Court. So again, seeking $10 trillion in remedy against the U.S. government on account of the fact they've done nothing, about all of this, but basically enable such corruption to be, depriving me of life and property, a violation of my constitutional rights, and corruption, so great that, the local authorities, in conjunction with federal authorities, have basically bedded my wife, who tried to murder me, let her go free, and to let all these other murderers go free, and to deprive me of my estate. It's mass corruption, mass corruption. At any rate, and I know it's virtually unbelievable, but I believe after I submit all the evidence, I think that people will realize I'm telling the truth. At least I hope so, for your sakes. We have got to, this cannot go on. This is no longer business as usual. We've got people that, have crept into the offices that were reserved for the honorable. Again, here it is, notarized, and the complaint's notarized. It was initially submitted last fall, but as of yet, not even one evidentiary hearing. Nothing but, attorneys for all these people, wanting to charge me for daring to notify them that people are being murdered, and that I'm a survivor of an attempted homicide and not one criminal investigation to date. In places of public trust, and that when I went to the authorities, instead of them helping me solve the crimes, they decided to join in, and basically, knew that my wife was involved. Here it is, notarized again. Okay, this is the affidavit notarized. Okay. So let's go through the affidavit. Alright, here it is, the affidavit, and let me open it up so people can read it. Okay, I've sent this to so many people in power, trying to get somebody to send me some honest, honorable investigators to make sure that people are not being tortured and murdered in our hospitals up here, and from the witnesses I talked to, it's going on across the nation. But people get so drugged up and tortured so bad that when they get out, they drool on themselves, and people think they're mentally ill. Well, they are after what they go through. They're so ill they can't hardly express themselves anymore, and that's the whole idea. So people just think that they're, nuts, and nobody listens. Right? But I am sound in mind, despite everything I've been through, and it is tough to believe, and I understand it's tough to believe. I still am in somewhat state of shock that things have gotten this bad, and I am sober. I'm not on drugs or drinking or anything, and these are the truth as I've recorded to the best of my knowledge. Okay, in May of 2004, this is how long I've been battling, to try to save people, and again, it was almost 2 years after this happened, but let me just read this. In May 2004, I went into a hospital located in the state of Washington to have a septoplasty and a tonsillectomy. This is a nose job, basically, in order to correct my ability to breathe. One of my passages was completely, almost shut due to the fact I broke it as a child. My septum must have really deviated. So my CPAP, even though I've been prescribed for CPAP apnea, wasn't working because I didn't have an airway. So prior to surgery, I had a pre-screening performed by the surgeon, Dr. Michael Cruz. Here's his address, here's his phone number. The surgeon was referred to me and present the day of surgery by this doctor. And there's Timothy Chestnut, there's his address, there's his phone number. In order to make surgery was appropriate for my state of health, and during the pre-screening, my surgeon asked some poignant questions that I believe at the time was just quite small. He asked me what profession I was in, whether or not I was successful at it. I replied as real estate and made some fortune. He further inquired as to what I estimated the value of them was worth. Well, none of it's freaking business, Now, I know I've heard somebody say, well, they ask those questions just to determine if you can pay the bill. Well, I've got insurance, right? So it's like, well, nowadays, because insurance doesn't pay the bill, even though they say they're supposed to, or 80% of it, they want to know that you can still pay it more. But no, the questions were, of more personal affairs. And the questions were interjected in such a manner as to seem like polite conversation rather than serious prying into the state of my affairs, even so far as asking me whether I had a will or not. So I estimated at the time, before I'd been robbed and before, the market crashed and everything else, due to the calling of all the real estate loans, right? And we've got that I had about $2 to $3 million in holdings, and that I've been too busy to get a will in place yet. And that until recently, my wife and I really didn't have a lot of assets to protect. Right when we got to this stage, she decided that she'd just take away walk away with all of it by murdering me. Now, I know a lot of people think, yeah, sure, but it is true. She's not right in the head, and she's greedy, and she's somehow found so many people that are like herself that she's basically screwed her way into freedom, and to them helping her. And it's really hard for me to take that in, but it's the truth. He said something about a will that might be a good idea to get in place. You never know what might be happening, no matter how minor it may. The questions continued about a transfusion if one were necessary. All this questioning made me inquire just how routine this kind of surgery was. He was supposed to be just routine, and he was asking about wills and transfusions. And anyway, he showed me that it was minor, but sometimes occasions that might require a transfusion. I told him I didn't want any blood products, but he kept prodding, even if you were dying from a blood loss. And the reason I didn't want any blood products is because being a medical lab tech, I've studied, hematology, immunohematology, parasitology. I'm thoroughly aware of all the diseases that are delivered by blood. I didn't want anybody's blood in my body. I didn't care whether it had been screened or not. They're still discovering diseases now, so I didn't want it. But it's like, I conceded that if I had lost so much blood, I was in imminent danger of dying. Then a transfusion would be permissible, but that it had to be an exact match only. O positive blood, no O negative. I wrote that on the transfusion permission form. At the time, I could not remember why I was so apprehensive, other than, like I said, I didn't want blood diseases. About receiving a blood transfusion, and why I was insisting it had to be an exact match only. That's what I didn't. I just knew I had to insist that it had to be an exact match at the time. I didn't remember at the time why I was insisting that it had to be an exact match. I just knew I had to. And also, I had to go to the hospital deaconess, involved in my blood, to sign the blood transfusion. When I wrote on the transfusion that it was to be given an emergency, that I lost so much blood I was in danger of dying, and that it had to be exact match only, O positive only, I wrote this, quote-unquote. I asked for a copy of the form, and the nurse was obviously not pleased that I had written on the form. She went behind the wall where I could hear whispered conversation. Soon she came back and said that the copier was being serviced in the nurse home some 3 floors away, but she'd still give me a copy if I wanted it. The way she said it was like climbing Mount Everest to go get me a copy. So I regret that I didn't insist on it. I should have. The way she said it in such an exasperated voice, I just politely asked to make sure it was in my medical record. Again, I didn't remember at the time why I was so apprehensive about a blood. I only knew that I had to insist on exact match only, and that I really didn't want one at all. And again, I knew why I didn't want one was because of all blood-borne diseases nowadays. But I didn't understand why it was exact match only that I was insisting on at the time. The day of surgery came, and as a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I prayed fervently, not feeling at all comfortable inside about it. Nevertheless, I knew I had to get it done in order to breathe through my nose properly, and prior to going under the anesthesiologist, still the practice is probably the most corrupt concerning Wilsons because they have to be present during virtually all surgical procedures. Dr. James Joy, please verify all attending physicians and assistants in the medical record and the daily employment records from Deaconess. As I just want to ask me the same questions my surgeon asked me about my profession, my status, and my state, and whether or not I got my will in place yet. Again, I foolishly thought this was all just professional small talk, so I answered as I had to my surgeon that my wife and I had simply been too busy to get our wills in place yet. He reassured me that I had nothing to worry about anyway, as this was very routine minor surgery. I was more than apprehensive as he put me under. My sole comfort was that I entrusted my soul to the safekeeping of our Lord. The next thing I recall was waking up in a dark room with a young nurse intern standing next to a blood bag holder, squeezing a blood bag that was going into my IV. I asked her what happened, and she replied that apparently I'd lost an unusual amount of blood during surgery. So they had to give me 3 whole units and she was finishing the last of the 3 units at that time. She was standing next to a machine that I didn't recognize, and so I asked her what it was, and she replied it was a blood warmer because it was being used to get the blood warm that she was giving me. She continued that they had been unable to locate O positive blood in the entire hospital, And so they had decided to give me raw O negative blood rather than the frozen compacted cells. She said the raw blood was better in an emergency situation. I knew inside that was incorrect, but I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness, and so I muttered something about universal donor before blacking out. The next I woke in a brightly lit room with a huge tube down my throat, and I was suffocating. Nurses and doctors were all around me, frantic as I sat up and tried to pull the tube out that was choking me. Someone was yelling, hold him down, and another, put him out, which they did. Then I awoke in what appeared to be yet another room with just a young man and a woman. When I awoke, I was suffocating again with a tube in my throat, only this time my hands and legs were tied to the gurney, so I couldn't sit up or do anything but jerk around and pound my fingers as loud as I could on the metal rails, trying to get their attention. The woman had her back to me, and as I struggled, the young man smirked. I mean, he laughed as pink foam started coming out of my mouth. This individual knew I was suffocating and for my wife, and he thought it was funny. And then he turned his back on me, and the woman was acidly saying that acting like a wild man wouldn't help me, or wouldn't save me, and that they had to restrain me to keep me from pulling the tube out that was in my throat and preventing me from screaming for help. My mouth filled with thick foamy substance, pink foamy substance that began to running down my cheek out of my mouth as I tried frantically to get them to look at me so they could see that I was suffocating. Again, at the time, I was thinking that, they must be ignorant or something, but that guy was laughing at me. He knew full well what was going on. I mean, and so did she, saying acting like a wild man wouldn't save me, frantically to get them to look at me so they could see I was suffocating. And as I felt the darkness closing in, I shed a tear that I wasn't unable to tell my wife. At the time, I didn't know she had told them to freaking go ahead and off me. Unable to tell my wife that I loved her one last time, and in just a moment to think, into thy hands I commit my spirit, Lord Jesus. And I felt my entire body seize, convulse, and everything went black. And at the time I wrote this, I really don't like to think too much about it. I still suffer trauma every time I do. Well, I'm beyond trauma now to just downright good and angry, and really angry that I haven't been able to get any, legal help in here to put these people behind bars where they belong, and to save people's lives. I mean, I can't believe that I have to deal with these people being loose while I'm fighting for my life in torturous agony on account of what they've done to me, and not one law enforcement has helped me, or instead they bedded her, let all these people, murderers, go free, bedded my wife and let her go free, and have assisted in her depriving me of my estate, as well as leaving me fighting for my life. And you might be thinking at this point, why is it taking them 2 years to tell someone about this? If they really wanted him dead, why is he still alive? I'll tell you that at the time so much happened to me, it took me all this time, at the time I started typing this, just to recover enough strength and cognitive ability to even remember everything that happened to me. And then let me tell you as best as I can and recall exactly how it happened. I really thought I'd suffocated to death at the last episode, and apparently I did, but I was surprised to awaken yet again in yet another region of the hospital in ICU, yet another attending nurse about my height and a healthy build. The story went something like I'd suffered pulmonary edema from the negative pressure around my lungs due to my sleep apnea condition, and that it was an extremely rare event, and that I was very lucky to have been resuscitated by a shot of adrenaline. This is just BS. It's nothing but BS. I mean, I did suffer pulmonary edema, but it wasn't from negative pressure around my lungs, an extremely rare event. It was the fact that they gave me intentionally in an incompatible blood transfusion, and I suffered an acute hemolytic reaction. They denied giving me the transfusion, but I can prove that they did. Absolutely prove to anybody that's a medical expert and that knows how to read lab reports and so on and so forth that this is just BS. They gave me an incompatible blood transfusion, blood I didn't even need, intentionally to deprive me of my life. It was not an accident. It was intentional. And if they say that the first one was an accident, well, the second episode definitely was intentional. And it's, the longer time goes by, the harder it is for me in order to be able to call the witnesses involved, to be able to prove that this was done intentionally. My wife Jane Swinson told me at the time that she had been told I suffered pulmonary edema followed by cardiac arrest twice, once for 3 minutes and another for 5 minutes, without oxygen or heartbeat. She also told me that the attitude of all the involved doctors changed dramatically after the attempt on my life, and prior to surgery they were all well-mannered and friendly, and afterwards extremely aloof and cold, and that would correspond to my memories as well. Finally, I was transferred to yet another area of the hospital to complete recovery. I was given oxygen, and they had a catheter in place. I was given intravenous hydration. I asked the attending nurse why I had a slight elevated temperature, sweats followed by chills, and dark brown urine, and she replies that apparently I was suffering from a quote-unquote slight allergic response to the blood transfusion, end quote. She also said that the brown urine was from the diuretic they were given. I later found out these responses were all lies, man. This was textbook acute hemolytic response, that I was given. And this is textbook what they normally give to somebody that was given an incompatible blood transfusion, textbook, right here. I was given prednisone and Norco. I was told it was a pain medicine, but it was like, later read on the internet that diuretics and prednisone are typically used to treat acute hemolytic blood transfusion reactions and sent home to recover. Nobody, and the pulmonologist, the specialist, Trent Chestnut, definitely knew I was given I had an acute hemolytic reaction to the blood transfusion, but he lied in his report, covering up the fact that this is what occurred, and that guy for sure knew. My wife and I had purchased recliners just so I could rest upright with the splints in my nose. Very ill, my intestines felt like stone, and it was some time before I could eat solid foods. I drank mostly and ate very soft foods like yogurt, cooked spinach. Time came for my splints to be removed, and my surgeon, Dr. Cruz's job. I must say that part of the surgery was a success. I could breathe through my nose sufficiently for the first time in over 25 years and can actually smell things I hadn't since I was a child. Food tasted better. I thought I was on my way to a successful recovery. At that point in time, after a few months had gone by and stuff, I remembered about, suffocating to death with my hands tied, and notified the hospital that if they were going to tie someone to a gurney, they should have at least placed an emergency button in their hand. I also stated that I didn't believe that lawsuits strictly for personal revenge were appropriate due to my faith, and that I only wanted to make sure they implemented that in the future so no one would go through what I did. And months went by, and I tried very hard to return to full-time work. Well, Joy gives me a call later on and completely denies that it happened twice and stuff, and that I was ever tied at all, That guy is a murderer, and it was intentional, and he just was doing his best to cover up the fact. Months went by, and I tried very hard to return to full-time work, but it was just taking my life force energy back no matter how hard I tried. I studied, changed my diet, spent thousands of dollars on the world's best supplementation, as I'm fundamentally opposed to pharmaceuticals due to the harmful side effects of my studies concerning them in the Holy Bible. I got a call from the anesthesiologist, Dr. Joy, regarding my written complaint of being tied to the gurney. He assured me that it never happened and that it was psychological transference from the previous episode I noted above, and that the second episode had never happened at all, which is just, again, absolute lie. I became so enraged during that phone call from him, I almost decided to litigate the matter, and I struggled with my faith for months regarding that course of action, eventually chose to forgive him. As I really was too weak to take on any such battle anyway, and I wanted inner peace rather than turn over the wrong that was done to me, and the physicians unwilling to apologize for it, but tried to dismiss it with meaningless jargon. As more times passed, I found certain supplements help. I mean, you got to remember, you're bedridden, you're in agonizing pain, you know these people are lying, but your wife won't help you get an attorney to fight them, and again, at the time, I didn't realize that she was just saying, oh, I'm so tired, I can't do it and stuff, and to be tied up for, which is just, again, just nothing but more BS to cover up everybody's complicity for my attempted murder. As more time passed, I found certain supplements helped, and I had some better days, but overall my health was continuing to decline. Eventually it was becoming next to impossible just to make it out of bed and go to the bathroom and feed myself. While I slept 4 hours or 14, I just never felt recharged, and it was becoming impossible for me to work. In between days or weeks of not being able to do anything much at all but make a few phone calls in a desperate attempt not to lose my clients, I'd get on the internet, try to figure out what was going on. I started entering all my symptoms and was fairly certain that somehow I'd developed hepatitis. I thought that the blood that I'd been given had given me hepatitis, and I went to see an internist, and Dr. Tipata of Coeur d'Alene, who literally disappeared. This guy just disappeared from the entire region and ceased medical practice in this region shortly after diagnosing me, and the direct-indirect Holmes test somehow also disappeared. I mean, certain things of my medical record was, completely deleted, and this after I'd seen the report and looked. I had an extensive amount of blood work done. It tested negative for all currently known forms of hepatitis, and everything appeared rather normal, except for a slightly elevated ALT, liver transphase, an enzyme in your liver indicating you may have hepatic issues and need to look into it. And cholesterol was elevated. There was also something about the direct-indirect Holmes test. One of those tests tested positive, and of course that's been, and that's for antibodies or something like this, and I can't remember now exactly what it indicates, but an expert would know that this is an important part of this whole thing. I know it's an important part, I just don't remember now how to explain it. What he decided was wrong with me was that I tested positive for infectious mononucleosis. I later read this can indicate Wilson's. It's right on the internet regarding Wilson's disease, and the scientific finding, I noticed that they've since either hidden or had removed off the internet, but this has been found by some laboratory in the United States that people that have this can actually indicate a false positive for this. Anyway, I asked him how I could have gotten mono since I had been at home for months and my wife and I had been intimate because I've been too ill. He looked at me skeptically and said something about kissing or sexual contact, of which I knew neither had occurred. I've been seriously ill. Like fighting for my life ill. And he said I only needed to rest and offered some form of sleep aid, which I picked up at the Costco. I continued to study and research and attempt to find natural products that would help me recover. My short-term memory was getting so bad and the effort to get up out of a chair so strenuous that by the time I stood, I was forgetting why I'd made the effort in the first place. I was forgetting food in the microwave. I began to think I was developing early-stage Alzheimer's. At 40 years of age, this was very draining. That not only was I physically without life force, but that mentally I was beginning to really suffer. Thank God my wife found this product known as Lucidal about a month after, and I found out, like people have this thing about Munchausen's and stuff where they can poison you and then try to pretend like they're, really caring for you to cover up their, crap. Especially somebody that's really highly intelligent like my wife, so there was things she was doing to appear like she wasn't involved in the fact that she was poisoning me and trying her best to put me in the grave to get the check to pay these people